You are listening to the IFH Podcast Network. For more amazing filmmaking and screenwriting podcasts, just go to ifhpodcastnetwork.com.
Welcome to Inside the Screenwriter's Mind, episode number 1. Either write something worth reading or do something worth writing. Benjamin Franklin.
Have you ever wondered what it's like inside a screenwriter's mind? In this podcast, we explore how successful screenwriters tackle structure, plot, character, dialogue, and the film business. Get ready to go down the rabbit hole of story. Let's travel inside the screenwriter's mind with your guide, Alex Ferrari.
Welcome to the first episode of Inside the Screenwriter's Mind. I am your guide, Alex Ferrari. Today's show is brought to you by Bulletproof Script Coverage. Now, unlike other script coverage services, Bulletproof Script Coverage actually focuses on the kind of project you are and the goals of the project you are. So we actually break it down by 3 categories: micro budget, indie film market, and studio film. There's no reason to get coverage from a reader that's used to reading tentpole movies when your movie's going to be done for $100,000. And we wanted to focus on that at Bulletproof Script Coverage. Our readers have worked with Marvel Studios, CAA, WME, NBC, HBO, Disney, Scott Free, Warner Brothers, The Blacklist, and many, many more. So if you need your screenplay or TV script covered by professional readers, head on over to covermyscreenplay.com. And guys, I have a special treat for you. If you are interested in getting a 3-part video series on screenwriting and how to write blockbusters in Hollywood today by some Oscar winners, some multi-billion-dollar screenwriters, all you got to do is head over to bulletproofscreenwriting.tv/free video series. Now, in today's show, we go inside the mind of Brendan McCarthy, who is the co-writer of Mad Max Fury Road. This show is brought to you by Indie Film Academy's podcast with Jason Buff. And Jason did this awesome interview during the time of the release of Mad Max Fury Road. And I mean, when that movie came out, it came out literally like one of those immovable forces of cars in the movie. And it took Hollywood by storm. And the story of how Brendan actually got to write or co-write this film with George Miller, the legendary George Miller, is a story in itself. So enjoy going down the rabbit hole of story with Brendan McCarthy.
The first thing I was hoping we could talk about, because most of our listeners are, have a film background but don't necessarily have a comic background. So I was wondering if you could talk about your background in comics and kind of what got you into doing comics in the first place.
Okay. Well, I read comics when I was a kid. I'm English, and in the UK we used to get American comics imported into certain newsagents. And I would pick off spinner racks, things like original things like the Steve Ditko Spider-Man run, Jack Kirby's Fantastic Four run, and some of the DC comics, the Silver Age ones like the Infantino, Flash, Gil Kane's Green Lantern, and Atom. So that was my choice. But I was raised on British comics, but gradually moved over to American comics, which at that time were quite rare in the UK. And that led to a lifelong interest in the comic book medium and a desire to develop it, turn it into something akin to what music occupies in culture or used to, that we could grow this medium up and do substantial work in the comic book field. I always had that intention. I always felt it was possible to become, if you like, the Beatles of comics, as opposed to, to turn comics into something much more exciting socially. And I was part of the 80s UK, what's known as the British Invasion, which led by Alan Moore, people like Neil Gaiman, later Grant Morrison, John Wagner, writer of Judge Dredd. Well, I was part of that original movement, and I worked with a writer called Peter Milligan, who went on to become a big-name writer in comics, and worked for about 15 years in comics before leaving to get into computer animation.
Did you start out doing things, subjects that were more kind of surreal, or did you start out doing more like traditional comics?
Well, when I was a young kid of about 10, I was drawing my own superhero comics. The Puma was one of mine. You may never have heard of him. Well, yeah, exactly. So it's just because it was drawn in the back of my school book. As I went to art college and studied painting and surrealism and Dadaism and all the, opened and expanded my understanding of visual arts, storytelling, all sorts of stuff. I did a painting and film degree, so I always had a strong interest in film as well. When I started to actually produce my mature comics from my mid-teens era, then the aspirations had grown past superheroes, and I was interested in surrealism and the sort of at the time, when I came of age, punk rock was happening, so that infused my art with a kind of edgier graphic sensibility. Much of it inspired by a non-comic artist called. Now, what's his name? He did the Sex Pistols posters. His name momentarily escapes me. He did all the famous Sex Pistols, Jamie something. Anyway, he was a big influence on me with that very hard-edged, photocopied, cut-up style. And I took that kind of style. And just at the same time in the marketplace, arising up was a British comic called 2000 AD, which featured Judge Dredd, which seemed to kind of everybody, whoever became anybody in British comics, worked on that comic for a certain period of time. I certainly did.
Now, 2000 AD, did they have different topics that were in the same magazine, or what exactly was 2000 AD?
What you in America would call an anthology. That's okay. How our British comics come out that way. They always come out with about 6 different stories contained in them, and you follow the story every week, and they come out every week rather than every month. So it's a different format, but that way you got a wide variety of stuff. Judge Dredd was by far the best thing in it. Everybody wanted to work on that character. He became a phenomenon and was part of that revolutionary fervor that gripped comics in the 80s, leading to, the more kind of radical stuff from people like Howard Chaykin in America and Los Bros Fernandez, all that stuff. I mean, Dave Stevens, even with his Rocketeer, that was quite a substantial piece. That kind of whole period where it felt like the British had taken over everything in the comic industry with their harder, more cynical, darker tone. But it was a good time, very exciting time. But it came to an end like all kind of movements do.
Now, I want to fast forward a little bit, and since we're primarily talking filmmaking, I was hoping that we could walk through kind of your backstory starting with Mad Max 2, and then kind of, obviously going through the entire story of working with the film. So can you describe, you said you were in Australia when you first saw the second Mad Max film, The Road Warrior?
That's right. I was doing what is now called a gap year, where I finished university and I had saved up a few dollars in the days when you didn't have to pay monstrous university fees. And I decided to go on a trip around the world. So I basically took to the hippie trail, as it's known, which was I went through Egypt, through India, with all the gurus, and through Nepal, into Indonesia, down to Australia, and then across through Hawaii into Los Angeles and back to London. So it was quite an interesting trip. Took over a year. And when I got to Australia, I was allowed to work there because it's part of the UK Commonwealth. And so I got a job, my very first job in animation with Hanna-Barbera, doing something like a Yogi Bear special or something. It was pretty horrific stuff. Right. That just let me stay in Australia, replenish the wallet. And while I was there, I became interested in surfing, which then wasn't really much of a thing. I'm going back 30 years now. It wasn't the thing it's become now. It was very underground, just kind of a few coastal towns would have some sort of surfer, pothead type people. And then, so I was looking at the surfing, and also at the same time, Mad Max 2 came out. I'd seen Mad Max 1. In those days, you saw films in what were known as midnight specials, which was double bill screenings of R-rated movies, usually in porn theatres that were being commandeered for the evening to show the film. So I saw Mad Max 1 on a double bill with Cars That Ate Paris, which is a great double bill, and it kind of alerted me to sort of exploitation films. As there seemed to be something strange about these Australian car movies. But also they were the two seminal directors of the Hollywood revolutionary New Wave, the Australian New Wave, which were Peter Weir and George Miller. Mm-hmm. So So when I saw Mad Max 2 had just come out, when I was in Australia, I went on to see it, and I was absolutely blown away. It was kind of like one of those fundamental moments where your psyche is rearranged by a piece of art, and you realise that it's going to have this sort of enormous effect upon you. Well, with the surfing and the Mad Max film, I concocted a comic strip with Peter Milligan, writer, called Freakwave, which was basically Mad Max goes surfing. On my way back into LA, the first time in LA, I decided to try and pitch it as a movie. Didn't know what the hell I was doing, just sort of ridiculous, really. But in the end, I managed to sell it as a comic rather than a film, and that led to a career in American comics. And then the comic strip Freakwave, which was this Mad Max Go Surfing thing, then led on to our own, being given my own comic called Strange Days, which was produced with Peter Milligan and Brett Ewins, and featured Freakwave in a more mutated form. I'd been influenced strongly by Zardos, John Boorman's sci-fi film, with the giant floating heads. Right. So the Freakwave strip that started off as a Mad Max Go Surfing type strip, so Waterworld, evolved into more of a psychedelic Alice in Wonderland type of, psychedelic version of Mad Max. So that was my interest in Mad Max. While I was in Australia, I did try and meet all the Mad Max people. I did Mad Max 2, and I met everybody, the writers, the producers, everybody except George Miller. He was more elusive. So I never met him. I was just a young guy, age 20, just hanging around the offices of George Miller's production company, seeing who I could meet. And then, lo and behold, sort of about 15 years later, I'm ending up in the offices of George Miller writing Fury Road with him. So that was quite a strange twist of fate.
Yeah. Well, can we, I want to rewind just a little bit to that first experience with Mad Max 2. Can you talk a little bit about what you feel like you connected with specifically with that movie, and what really kind of like hit you?
Yeah.
I mean, did you know when you were watching it that it was kind of like going to be that, life altering to you?
It was, yeah. It was, the thing about, obviously, in the era at that time, you just had the massive punk revolution happening with the Sex Pistols and the redefinition of music and culture by punk. I mean, it was very widespread and quite a deep turnaround of, it upset all the 60s icons and all that stuff were displaced by this new kind of raw energy. And Mad Max 2, the first Mad Max sort of had that feel in it as well, but Mad Max 2, because of the costuming and the more of a punk look, really captured that energy. And I felt, for me, Mad Max 2 was the most immersive film experience I'd ever had up to that point, in that as soon as the film started and you cut through the early montage into Mel Gibson and Wes and all that stuff, you were right in the middle of this action, and I was just absolutely taken with it. The shocking brilliance of the costume designs, how good Mel Gibson was. I was just absolutely in that movie from the moment it started right to the end, when, he crushes the tanker, collapses, and he stands there holding the sand running through his hand with a crooked grin on his face. From that whole story and how it arcs and moves through its plots and stuff like that, I was absolutely captivated. And when I walked out of the cinema, I was so bamboozled by what I'd just seen, I just turned around, bought a ticket, and went back in again. I had to watch it again. Right. In the vain hope that I could somehow figure out what they'd done, how they produced this amazing work. But it took me I saw it about probably, in the first month, I probably saw it about 20 times. And in those days, you just had to buy a ticket and see it in the cinema because we didn't have video recorders or anything. Right. So, but after about the 6th or 7th viewing, I could start to actually watch the film as to how it was being made. But because it took that long to not get sucked into the narrative all the time. So it became a very important film to me, and it's probably the film I've studied the most. So I've probably seen it about 100 times, and also I revisited it then a lot when we were doing Fury Road. Right. So I feel, there was something, George captured lightning in a bottle in that film, and I think I think most people consider it the best of the Mad Max trilogy.
Greetings from the Humongous. The Lord Humongous, the warrior of the wasteland, the Ayatollah of rock and roller.
I'm gravely disappointed. Again you have made me unleash my dogs of war. Look at what remains of you gallant scouts. Why? Because you're selfish. You hoard your gasoline. You will not listen to reason. Now my prisoners say you plan to take your gasoline out of the wasteland. You sent them out this morning to find a vehicle. A rig big enough to hold that fat tank of gas. What a puny plan. Look around you. This is the valley of death.
See? Nothing can escape. The Humongous rules the wasteland. Give them nothing. Blow it up. Give them nothing.
Humongous will not be defeated. Quiet! No more games. No more games. We are here for a purpose. We come with an offer. No matter. We go in. We kill. We'll kill him. We kill him. Easy. He's still my dog of war. I understand your pain. We all lost someone we love. But we do it my way. Moses, wait! We do it my way. Fear is our ally. The gasoline will be ours. Then you shall have your revenge. Take him away.
Over the years, you created Freakwave, and you were trying to get in touch with George Miller, and you finally got in touch with him. Can you describe a little bit that first meeting with him and kind
Sure.
of what you learned and what that kind of maybe how he was different than what you were expecting, or just what that was like?
Right. Well, as a kind of, by this stage, I'm a lifelong Mad Max fan. I've been disappointed by Thunderdome, although Thunderdome had loads of great stuff in it. Somehow it didn't quite gel. Right. And because they decided strategically to do it as a family-friendly film, it meant that stuff like the Thunderdome, which was a phenomenally great idea, had become sort of watered down a bit. And if that had been an R-rated Mad Max film, Thunderdome probably could have been the best of them, you know. Mm-hmm. But that's the way he chose to go. So, I mean, I had all those feelings and, you know, insights about the Mad Max trilogy. And so what happened is that I was working on a TV series, which was the world's first computer-animated long-form pre-Pixar and DreamWorks stuff called Reboot. And Reboot was a CGI TV series made in Canada. in the TV series, we featured different pastiches. We did one based on Michael Jackson's Thriller. We did another one based on the James Bond Connery films. So we did one as a pastiche of Mad Max 2 Road Warrior. And I actually sent a VHS of that episode to George Miller, just saying, with a little card on it saying, "Whatever happened to Mad Max?" ? And so this pastiche of Road Warrior, which was really quite funny and clever, George saw it. At that time, computer animation wasn't widely known and understood. Lots of people would say, "What is this?" And so it's called CGI animation. So you got to remember, this is pre-Pixar. And so they were interested in finding out more about the computer animation, really. So I went down to Hollywood to have a meeting with them, which I thought would last about half an hour, because they were thinking about doing a Mad Max TV series along the lines of Xena and Hercules. This is going back, it's nearly 20 years now, pre-Netflix. Mm-hmm. So they were looking to think, could we make vehicles or environments for a TV series with possible Mad Max TV series? It wouldn't have had Mel Gibson in it. Would have just been a Warner Brothers Xena type TV series. And so I met them, and we just sort of talked. And I talked that probably drove George Miller up the wall talking about Mad Max and stuff. But we had a very good, intense, honest conversation about Mad Max, why it was great and what worked and what didn't work, in the trilogy. And
did you tell them that you weren't a fan of the third one?
I think there's loads of great stuff in the third one. It just didn't quite work.
Right.
I think the first half is very good and very credible as a Mad Max film. Second half with the kids. I think the kids are the biggest mistake on the third one, that he, instead of treating them with the rigorousness of something like Lord of the Flies, where we look at a child society, he just kind of went cute on them. So I think once you go cute, I feel like it's a dead end dramatically. Right. Anyway, so look, me and George just ended up talking for about 3 hours or something insane, rather than that, and we just kind of clicked and hit it off. And before I left, I pitched him an idea for Mad Max 4, which was completely mental and very silly, but it had some elements in it that were later going to turn up in Fury Road. So I left, and we said we'll convene again some point. There might be something. In the meantime, George had now started to, because I've been talking so much about the Mad Max films, and I guess it had been dormant in him, he'd probably been thinking about it too. He started to mull over ideas for a fourth Mad Max film. And I think the TV series faded away, and he just focused now then on the Mad Max film. So I got a phone call 3 or 4 months later after that meeting saying, "George has got an interesting new idea for Mad Max, and would you like to go into Sydney and maybe knock it around with him?" And primarily they thought of me as just, he was going to hire another writer and I was going to design it as we went along. I'd board it and I'd design it and, I'd fill it out as we sort of discussed the narrative. And so when I went over to Australia, to Sydney, to work with George, in the end he just said to me, he liked my idea so much, he said, "Listen, do you want to write the film with me?" I said, "I'd love to write the film with you, but you've got to bear in mind I've never written a Hollywood feature film before." And he said, "Well, don't worry, I have." So let's get going. Because he'd been Oscar nominated for Babe and stuff like that, so, and Lorenzo's Oil. So we just set about it, and he kind of adopted his way of working, I think, to fit me, because I could write and draw as we went along. We used a thing called a whiteboard, it's an electroboard, it's called. It's basically a giant whiteboard which you can print out what you've drawn on the whiteboard. So what we would do is, every day we would write a little scene, and I'd draw, little thumbnail storyboards of the camera angles with, if there were new vehicles in it. Like, for example, if you came to a period in the Fury Road film, say, where the buzzards appear. Mm-hmm. Now, I can remember when we got the film to that point, we thought, right, we need a new tribe. The audience is now getting used to everything. We've got to just hit them with something they haven't seen before. And then we'd think, okay, and then gradually the buzzards evolved from an idea of looking at lizards in the Australian outback, thorny back lizards, all covered in spikes. And also Peter Weir's Cars at 8 Paris, that spiky Volkswagen. That sort of thought, well, there's a look here. And then once I added buzzsaws so that they could go up their quick, nimble little cars, they can get right in and they can take the wheels out on a big truck in a few seconds because of their buzzsaws. That was the idea. They go in and out fast. They're a bit like, we wanted to do a vehicular equivalent of coyotes or hyenas, something scavenger. They had the feeling of being scavengers. Come in and out quick. Let somebody else almost do the kill and then take the booty, you know. So that would be an example of, so how the buzzards appeared in the movie would be an example of how me and George would work together on the film. We wrote the film chronologically and really felt every moment as we went along. And so when we get to the next minute, we were acutely aware of where's the audience? How savvy are the audience about what's just been shown? They're going to, you know, they probably have now absorbed everything. We've got to deliver something brand new to them at this point in the film. And that escalates the film further. So that we were very aware of, you know, just George's great gift is he knows where the audience is all the time. That's a fantastic thing that I learned from him. Always know where the audience is in relation to where you are in the film.
Now, when you say where the audience is, you mean how much they know about what's going on?
Well, where are they emotionally? Where are they at the point that you're showing them something? What are they feeling? Because you have to orchestrate the emotional response of the audience. That's, in a sense, ultimately what a film is, isn't it?
Right. So what was the origin of, I mean, what did he have ready when you started working on it? Was there already the basic story?
Yeah, George had just almost like a one sentence storyline about, you know, there's a citadel run by a warlord. He's got a bunch of girls in there. There weren't 5 at the time. And his favorite, warrior woman sneaks these women out on a supply run and then takes off with them to take them to her own ancestral home called the Green Place of Many Mothers. And in taking them there, she incites an armada to follow her with Mad Max strapped to the front of one of the hot rods. And ultimately Mad Max, who's a man who is, you know, probably insane through isolation, who doesn't want to be involved, against his instincts for survival, becomes involved. And by the finale of the film, we see that he has actually formed an attachment and expresses love to this warrior woman who probably feels the same way about him. And so you have this quite interesting story structure where you've got 2 disparate arcs that join together and actually come together right at the end of Act 2, where the reverse, you know, the decision to return to the Citadel, rather than running away from where, you know, your oppression is and all the rest of it, to find somewhere where the grass is greener, and then they find there is no such place, there is only the place they are in, and you have to change that rather than leaving it. That's the kind of lesson we wanted to say, you know, in terms of the subtext of the film. And so at the point when he then turns around with her and takes control, when he said it's his idea to go back to the Citadel, when she has led them on this, if you like, wild goose chase to a green place that doesn't exist anymore, it becomes Max's mission, if you like, or all of their mission, but he's fully joined in and is fully engaged. Right. Above our writing board, all the time, we had a phrase that said, engage to heal, meaning that's Max's journey.
Now, can you talk a little bit about how you work with your creative process? I mean, would you guys sit in a room and just throw ideas out, or would you go away and start kind of brainstorming on your own and then come back and then start talking about what you would come up with? And can you just talk a little bit about how you work creatively?
Yeah. All right. Well, I'll talk about how we worked on Mad Max Fury Road, because I work on my own. If I'm drawing a graphic novel, writing and drawing one, It's a very quiet, insular process, and I like that. I need to be able to be very quiet so I can travel imaginatively in my own mind to draw my graphic novels, if they're fantasy-based, which they usually are. But for Mad Max, it was very much something that, if you like, it was like 2 men in the Thunderdome. There was me, there was myself, and there was George, and basically the 2 of us were in his studio called the Mad Max room. He had a particular room designated where we'd stick stuff up on the walls, and gradually it became covered in storyboards to the point where the whole place was completely. By the end of the movie, we had the storyboarding process. We had about over 3,000 storyboards up on the wall, and so really, what we'd do is we'd come into work every morning. I mean, I'd run into work every morning sometimes because it was so exciting to find out what the hell's going to happen next in the story. We didn't know, So we had there was a very different ending to Fury Road that we were working towards, which in the end, when George walked in one day, said, "You know what? They've got to go back." And then we thought, well, hang on a minute, and we had a big hoo-ha about that, and gradually, the reasons for going back overpowered the reasons for continuing to go out into the wasteland. Mm-hmm. So that was a big turnaround. But generally, I think about we had a very powerful, strong, creative game of tennis going on, myself and George. So if I'd come in, part of the thing was to come in with a great idea and say, right, this is what happens next. And he'd go, brilliant. And then that happens. So you'd kind of have a brainstorming, I'd hit him one, he'd hit me back one. And, gradually the idea would cannon upwards to become what it was, Sometimes it would go nowhere and you would come up with characters that didn't work or were superfluous or too many characters, so we had to shave them down a bit. But really the first year was us two creating the whole storyline, figuring it all out. I'm drawing all designs. I did a first pass on the entire movie in that first year. And by the end of it, we had a kind of a document, which was it was like a mixture of a script and a manifesto and a design journal. And from that, we started to storyboard the film for the next year with Peter Pound and Mark Sexton, these great Australian artists. And so that became then the team. And with the storyboarding, George could then become much more specific about cameras and directing. And really, as George has pointed out in other interviews, you can't really script action. It's very difficult to script action. In a way, it's much better to actually define through storyboarding where cameras are, where people are located on vehicles. And it just makes the process so much easier because you know where everybody is and what they're doing. And you also then start to realize how much design plays a part in the story. Like you have to, because of certain things you want to happen in the script, you then, that then alters the design, say, of the vehicles. Like, for example, when we came up with the idea of the thunder sticks, those big lances with explosives on the end of them that they throw at things to blow them up, that meant that the design of the vehicles had to change when we came up with them a bit late. We didn't come up with them at the beginning. We came up with them later and then retrospectively changed the designs of the vehicles so that all the thunder sticks would sit properly in the vehicles, So I'm just saying that there's a constant interaction between design, storyboard, text, dialogue, all that stuff was just a one giant feedback loop.
Right. Is there anything that you specifically learned from working with George Miller?
Oh, yeah. I mean, I'd never written a Hollywood feature film before, so I got to understand the arc of a Hollywood film and how long, just roughly the work that goes into it, how much stuff needs to be in a film to keep you interested all the way through. Mm-hmm. I particularly learned about things like George's theory of the wave in a film, which is, he says he didn't say this is just me observing certain directors who aren't. If you take a director like Tim Burton, for example, he's a very interesting director, and now and then his films work very well. Sometimes they don't. And there's a sort of slight, with Tim Burton, I feel that he has a problem constructing a narrative through an entire movie, that the narrative doesn't rise and fall and then crescendo and end in the way that it should through a feature film, that sometimes the wave that you're following of the story collapses, and then he's got to crank it back up again through special effects or music and get you back up into the place he wants you to be. So I've become quite aware of films that run out of steam, particularly in the second act, that kind of stuff. So George's thing was that you have to make the first act so strong that it propels you with all the drama through the long arc of the second act of the movie. So, and then, you have to end then on a very strong note. And also his thing of how you leave the movie is, when you're walking out the movie, the feeling you have in you as you leave the movie is really important as well, how strong that is and how much it resonates. I learned a lot of that kind of stuff I learned from George that I wasn't that aware of. I was kind of vaguely aware of it, but I hadn't articulated it before. And plus I learned about, camera placing, about pure action. I happen to think when George Miller does car action, I feel that he's at his most pure as a director. That's why I love him the most, I appreciate Babe, which is superb. I appreciate Happy Feet and Lorenzo's Oil, etc. But to me, the sheer poetry of George Miller doing vehicular destruction, there's something about that. It's a bit like Jackson Pollock doing his drip paintings, or William Butler Yeats writing Easter 1916 or something. There's something about George Miller doing vehicular destruction that rises to the level of art. I don't know why that is, but the first time I saw Fury Road finally finished at the premiere the other night, I felt like this is actually like more of a work of art. As an example of an art form, this is really good, like in terms of just the cinematography, the action, the structure. It felt very accomplished to me, like a great painting or something, or a piece of great music. I felt that George had achieved that in Fury Road. I will just point out a personal high point in my life was actually going to the premiere of Mad Max Fury Road down at in Hollywood Boulevard there last week, a few days ago, and I sat down, in a nice chair to watch Fury Road, and who sat down behind me? Mel Gibson and George Miller. The two of them sat directly behind me, and we watched the film together. And at the end of the film, I turned around and George put his hand out and said, "Thanks, Brendan, that was fantastic." And Mel said, "Good job, man." So I got my hand shaken by Mel Gibson and George Miller, which was, wow. I'll tell you what, man, it was a great, as somebody who absolutely loved The Road Warrior and for whom it was a life-changing film. George Miller and Mel Gibson are the sort of Martin Scorsese and De Niro of Australian film. They're a very deep combo, the Lennon McCartney, Simon Garfunkel. They're one of those. It was very powerful to watch a film, that I'd had a hand in making with those guys together. It was a great moment.
Now, was there a difference in was there anything that surprised you when you saw the premiere? Like about the story or anything?
Yeah, well, I purposely kept away from looking at any other versions of the film, like, screenings and, all that sort of stuff. I just want to see George's final version. I just want to see what George Miller, does to Mad Max Fury Road. That's what I wanted to see. I didn't want to see the previous versions, where this scene has been still in it, or that scene had been cut, or it didn't have the narrative, or whatever. I just wanted to see the final thing. And it was different, yeah. It's about 85% what I wrote with George, and it's exactly the same story and everything happens the same way. Some of the dialogue is different, and, look, honestly, I would take issue with some of the dialogue in it, but that's me as a writer sort of thinking, no, I don't think that works, or I wouldn't have done that there. And there's other bits where I worked out stuff with George, which he changed and he made it better. So, it's all swings and roundabouts, isn't it?
Right. Yeah, I always, you wonder what it would have been like with Mel Gibson in it too,
Yeah, well, what I wrote and was involved in was the Mel Gibson version, in the fourth Mel Gibson film in the Mad Max series. So that's why I was interested in. I was an advocate for Mel Gibson probably long after anybody else was. Because I think it's interesting that you've got this guy when he was really young in the first Mad Max film. And if you do Mad Max 4, you've got him on the cusp of going into mature age. And then really come back to him in another 20 years when it's like it's Mad Max Unforgiven and he's a crazy old coot, I think that would have been an amazing arc of that, of an actor and a film series that nobody had ever done before. Anyway, in the end, because of the reality of filmmaking and how long it took to get Mel faded out of it, it did go to Heath Ledger, apparently. George was telling me the other day. And once Heath passed away, George was looking for that slightly similar kind of animal spirit that he found in Tom Hardy. But if you go to the website which features my original concept art for Mad Max Fury Road, it's called artbrendan.com. ARTBRENDAN.com, artbrendan.com. If you go to that, you'll see production art which shows Mel Gibson in certain sequences and stuff. So, you'll get a feeling of what it could have been like.
Now, are you going to be involved with the future films, or is that something that's kind of on the horizon?
I don't know, and let's see what it does at the box office, and if there are any future films. That's there's a long way to go. It took us 18 years to get this one made, so hopefully if there is another one, or two, they won't take so long. The thing about, but I'm very, my thing about when I entered into the relationship with George in order to produce the Fury Road script and designs, we always had an agreement, a handshake agreement, that if this wasn't absolutely stunningly brilliant, we shouldn't do it. We should not disappoint Mad Max people by putting out a lackluster reboot. Right. And so, thankfully, Fury Road, I feel everybody feels it's passed the test, and it's probably as good as Mad Max 2. I don't think it's better, but it's certainly as good as the best in the series. So that's pretty much when we were actually writing and working in the early days of Fury Road. I mean, I took it upon myself to look at, like we both did, everything that we could, like things like Bullet and Fast and the Furious. Just look at the competition. See what do we have to beat that's out there. And quite frankly, in the end, the only competition we had was Mad Max 2. Really, nothing had still beaten Mad Max 2 in terms of sheer thrill power. And so that became the thing that we had to, not so much beat, but that was the yardstick, that we had to at least equal or surpass Mad Max 2 in the new one. So I think having proved that with Fury Road, that George can, kick ass on the vehicular destruction thrill side of life, well, you might find the next Mad Max, if one is made, I don't believe, I think people would be bored by a rerun of Fury Road with just like loads and loads of just cars smashing into each other. You can't do that again. So really I feel that the sequel to Fury Road, it's got to hinge upon a great idea. There's got to be a core concept at it, that is compelling enough, just as this one had a guy who's breeding wives, a guy who's breeding with women to try and perpetuate his own dynasty, which is what it kind of became in Fury Road as the core idea around which the whole story revolves. You need something very strong and compelling in a sequel, and a core idea which motivates an entire story. So, that's, sometimes that can be easier said than done. If that, maybe George has got that idea. I don't know, but that's the thing I'd be looking for though, is again, don't make Mad Max sequels just for the hell of it. Just make one if you've got one to make. And I think George has that integrity around the Mad Max franchise, that he's not going to dilute it and just turn it into, some, just yet another Terminator sequel that you sort of ho-hum,
Right. Okay. Now, what are you working on now in terms of your own projects?
Well, at the moment, I'm in the tail end. I'm in the final sort of few episodes of a graphic novel comic book series called Dream Gang, which could be best described as the X-Men meets Inception, although it's a lot more David Lynch than that. But basically, it's about a group of psychics who project themselves into dream worlds and uncover a kind of conspiracy to destroy the higher functions of the human race, so that we stop having dreams and visions, and musicians stop making songs and poets stop writing poetry. Martin Luther King doesn't say, I have a dream anymore, because all that's gone. We remove all that. We just become kind of akin to cattle, consuming cattle. Anyway, that's the sort of conspiracy that these psychics find when they're wandering around in people's dreams, and they have to kind of pull themselves together and do something about it and somehow defeat this this dark conspiracy. So that's what I'm working on at the moment, and when I get back to my home, I shall be starting work in a couple of days again on it and bring it thing. I've also written a couple of new feature films, and that's why I'm here in Hollywood, just doing some meetings and seeing, capitalizing on the buzz from Mad Max.
Right. Are you more comfortable now with like writing actual screenplays and things like that?
I like working with somebody. I'm a collaborator, really. I enjoy working with somebody. So I'm one of those guys that sort of, you think of the cliched Hollywood writing partner. One guy sits at the typewriter, the other guy walks around punching the air and coming up with crazy shit. Well, I'm sort of, those type of relationships suit me the best, where I have the person, like we have a kind of, a collaborator that can kind of give it structure and, it knows the traditional structures of screenwriting. Right. And then I can then take it and collaborate and bounce ideas with them, and hopefully between the two of us come up with something better than we would on our own.
Well, Brendan, I appreciate it. I know you've got to run, so I'll let you go, but I really appreciate your time, and best of luck in the future, and congratulations with the success of Mad Max Fury Road.
I take it you've seen it, yeah?
Yeah, I saw it, and I was absolutely blown away.
Yeah, and did you know the original trilogy?
Yeah, I mean, Mad Max 2 is one of my all-time favorites, and the original Mad Max, those are two of my favorite movies.
And how did you feel Thunderdome sat with the original trilogy?
I was never, my memory of Thunderdome was always seeing the Tina Turner video that was on MTV, over and over and over. Sure. Yeah. Yeah. And I remember seeing that, and I don't think I ever even saw it in the theater. When I saw when I saw Mad Max 2 or The Road Warrior, I saw it on TV. And so I would watch it on a VHS tape, and I recorded it, and it was kind of edited down. So it was like they cut out a lot of the scenes and everything. But I would watch it in slow motion. The first scene where Wes is chasing after him, I would watch all that in slow motion to see how they, and I wanted to be a filmmaker.
You did exactly what I did.
Yeah, since I was a little kid, I was like, that was my movie, And
how did you feel that Fury Road fit? How did it compare to the trilogy, do you think?
Perfectly.
Did it fit into the canon, do you feel?
Well, the thing that I was excited about, because when I first saw the preview, I didn't know it was even something that they were making, because when I would go see, I saw Babe and I saw all these other movies, and I would see George Miller's name attached, and I was like, is that Road Warrior George Miller? All right. And so I didn't really know he was even making it. And then all of a sudden one day I see the preview for Fury Road, and I see that it's involving a truck. The trailer. And, it's got the truck and it's got everybody chasing after it. And I was like, wow, this is going to be like taking the second half of The Road Warrior, and that's going to kind of be the framework for the entire movie.
Exactly.
So I was, I really kind of couldn't wait. It was one of a lot of people are excited about Star Wars. I was just like, counting down the days to watch Fury Road, and I was absolutely, yeah. So, the only thing that I was maybe different was just Tom Hardy playing the character of Max.
That's exactly right. That's the big thing to get over, isn't it? Not having Mel in it.
Right.
But, Tom did a good job, and, I think overall the film, most people are pretty pleased with it.
Yeah, and for me, I really love, I had previously, a week or so before, gone to see the Avengers, and I can't tell you how fed up I am with just digital effects, and everything is like
Avengers
CG.
Sent me to sleep. I left after about an hour and a half. I just was so bored with it.
Yeah. So I was just thrilled, and especially, I've been glued to YouTube looking at all the behind the scenes footage and how they were able to put everything together. And I think there's going to be, there's really a revolt going on to all this CGI. And I think you see it in the new Star Wars movie too, that people are like, they want to see people in danger,
Yeah.
They want to really see a movie being made instead of just everything done in the computer.
Yeah. I think Mad Max Fury Road is going to have a big influence on movie making from now on. It's going to change the, gear a bit, as you write about just all that very unbelievable CGI.
I hope you enjoyed going inside the mind of Brendan McCarthy If you want to get links to anything we spoke about in this episode, head over to the show notes at bulletproofscreenwriting.tv/ISM001. And if you like the show, please subscribe and leave us a review on Apple, Spotify, Stitcher, Spreaker, wherever you listen to the show. Head over to screenwritersmind.com. Thank you for listening. And as always, write, rewrite, sell, repeat. I'll talk to you next week.
Thank you for listening to Inside the Screenwriter's Mind with Alex Ferrari at screenwritersmind.com. And for more great filmmaking and screenwriting podcasts, go to ifhpodcastnetwork.com.